Hi, I'm Mary Hughes. I'm a political strategist from Palo Alto, California. And I want to talk with you for a minute about a very vexing question that comes up a lot. People always ask me, why is it taking so long for American women to get to parity in political representation in our country? It's a complex and vexing question, so let me take a run at it. Our culture is one that values the individual and values merit. We want to always pick the best person. And consequently, we are unlikely to set quotas or establish a ceiling for the number of people who can serve. We don't like to say that we're going to select people based on an immutable characteristic, because in America we are devoted to the ideal that Dr. King set forth, that we will be judged by the content of our character and our industry and our talent and our willingness to contribute to the community. In other words, as individuals. The problem with this approach is that while many other countries are speeding by us, we continue to plod or inch along just with more and more women, but a percentage point one election, 1.5% the next election. In other countries, they've chosen different paths. In the emerging African nations, they have often written constitutions which mandate that their parliaments or congresses will be a minimum of 40% female. For us, that looks like a quota, and with a quota comes a taboo. But there is an interpretation of why that happens that we ought to consider here in the United States, and it's simply this. We know that men and women are different. We know that the difference has value. There are wonderful studies now that show that women are likely to bring different issues to the fore. They run procedures in legislatures differently. They tend to favor open meetings, transparency. They are the ones who advance new ethics prescriptions. Women change the content of legislation. They are more inclined to consider their own life experience and what will the effect of this legislation be on women. And invariably, they look at issues in a less partisan context and will cross over from time to time to vote with folks of the other party, often women, to change a rule, a procedure, or a piece of legislation. That said, the countries that have said 40% of our legislature must be female have looked at this data and the difference between men and women and said, in our country, we want all of everyone's talent and experience at the table. And we believe so strongly in the value of what women bring to the legislative process that we're going to mandate that they have to be there. In some countries where they have tried this, the numbers of women who have subsequently been elected to those parliaments or legislatures has gone up almost exponentially. It's an interesting experiment, a very different assessment than our own in the United States, but it is definitely worth consideration because at the rate we're going, it will take a very long time for women to have parity, political parity, in our government. Now, why does that matter? Well, currently in the United States, in most sectors, business, service sector, manufacturing, in the nonprofit sector, in the service sector, women constitute between 18 and 24% of real decision makers, from managers and directors to boards of directors and executives. And the reason we think that that's so is when you don't have an institution that is leading change, things tend to stay the same. We look to government to set standards for change because government is the vehicle by which our collective sense of what's important gets actualized. So if there are more women in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives, that necessarily communicates that women are important, and you in the commercial world, you in corporations, those of you running educational institutions, women should be at the forefront of your institutions. But when we are all at the same level, there is an understanding or an unspoken, this must not be bothering anybody, because we're all at about 20% and it seems to be going along just fine. So there's a lot to consider here, but there are other models of doing things. And if we don't think we can get a quota system that will actually change the immediate composition of state legislatures and Congress, we might want to consider approaching political parties with the idea of committing more resources or a set amount of resources to the election of more women to fulfill what we now know, which is there's a great deal of talent, a great deal of initiative, different ways of organizing ourselves that women bring to an enterprise that the United States is not taking advantage of. And we need that talent at the table.